Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 28 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for the hot hatches of Gran Turismo. And in this episode we're featuring another Kei car, which is essentially Japan's most successful hot hatch category. And I love Kei cars. It's probably fairly obvious from my episode featuring the Daihatsu core that I love them. And the reason why I love them is the same reason why I have a lot of respect for cars like the NSX, the Skyline, the Supra, etc. And also, to some extent, for Japanese motorbikes as well, but not so much. And that is because the restrictions on performance cars are pretty heavy in Japan. Kei cars, performance cars, and, as I said, to some extent, superbikes as well. But what they manage to get their vehicles to accomplish within those restrictions are pretty amazing. Kei cars have pretty much 63 horsepower. It's very rare to find one with more than that. But what they can do for that 63 horsepower is phenomenal compared to European or American or whatever rivals. And this car is no exception to that. It's the 1997 Suzuki Alto, and this particular version is the Works Limited version. There are two versions of this shape Alto, both are very good. One is more of a sleeper, whereas this is the more boy racery of the two. And this is the version which we'll be featuring in the series for the sake of continuity. Now, what does it have to offer? Because Kei cars more or less share many similar specs to each other. They're very light. They tend to have around 650, 660cc engines, and as we said, 63 horsepower. And this car does fall into pretty much all of those expected norms. It has a 658cc turbo engine, produces around 63 horsepower, but fully tuned it's 182, which is seriously good. It also puts out 162 pound-feet of torque, which is also excellent for such a tiny engine. It only weighs in at 631 kilos, meaning that this car is a lot lighter than pretty much any European hot hatch, especially smaller hot hatches. As far as horsepower per tonne, it puts out 288, which is pretty decent, not quite as much as the Daihatsu. And the price is fantastic. Seriously cheap, almost dirt cheap, at a fraction over 11,000 credits. And that's one of the best things about the Kei cars on the game. They are so cheap. They're ridiculously cheap. And if you compare what you get for the money to bigger, more powerful hot hatches, it's pretty hard value to beat. Now, as far as the PP on this one, it sits at 487, and it's pretty competitive at that level. I wouldn't necessarily recommend racing it at that higher PP, because although it is a good car, it tends to be good on its own at that level. If you actually put it up against cars with more power, there are very few tracks where this will actually have the advantage. I'd recommend it at anything between, say, 350 and 425 pp. Maybe 450 at a push. Now, as far as straight line performance, it's not as strong as something like a Golf R32, of course, but for its power, for its PP, especially for its price and size, it's a seriously rapid little car. It can get around the Nürburgring in around 7 minutes or less, which, again, isn't the best in the game, I'm not saying that by any means, but is good for a car of its power and of its class to some degree. As far as what Kei car to choose, well, I'd say that's another one of the great things about the Kei car class. Because they're all so similar, to some extent it doesn't actually matter as much which one you go for. Because, yeah, some are definitely better than others, but they're all so good in their own ways that whichever one you do choose, you will be happy with. Now, if you're looking for pure speed in the Kei car class, the Daihatsu core takes some beating. It's a brilliant car. But this car is great in its own right as well. It has all-wheel drive, which is relatively rare for a Kei car. As you can see, you can lose control, like with any vehicle, and that's actually part of the fun sometimes, because it's such a tiny little jelly bean of a car that, and it shares this in common with all Kei cars, but it's incredibly fun, as well as being competitive. So the Kei car class overall isn't necessarily for everyone, but what you can accomplish with these tiny little micro racers is kind of a marvel among the performance car category, especially within the hot hatch category. So overall, if you're looking for a strong Kei car, not the strongest, but a strong one, the Alto Works Ltd is a great choice. And beyond to the wider spectrum of hot hatches, if you choose a technical circuit where the top speed advantages of your rivals doesn't really matter, then it can take on cars with significantly more power. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.